In this episode, we visit Grand Central Terminal, Wall Street, and end up at the 9/11 Memorial. Stay tuned for episode 4 as we visit Little Italy, Chinatown, and beyond for our final episode of this New York City adventure.
Because this is where everyone comes in on the train, so consequently, welcome everybody to the main concourse of Grand Central Terminal. We've already discussed why it's called a terminal and not a station. Now, let's talk about some of the beautiful landmarks here at the terminal. Number one, this clock. So the number one meeting spot in all of New York City.
That's the best spot.
I'm told by antique dealers that if this was just an antique brass and opal clock, it's semi-precious opal and brass, I'm told it would be worth about $100,000 to $150,000 US if this were just an antique clock. But because it is associated with the terminal, because it is the iconic symbol of Grand Central Terminal, which is without question the most famous train terminal in the United States, and arguably the most famous train terminal in the world. Arguably the most famous train terminal in the world. How much has Christie's appraised that clock for?
What number was it?
$10 million.
Oh, I was shooting high.
This is a map of the subway system, right? But it only serves the city of Greater New York. The New York City subway only serves the city. But Grand Central Terminal is a commuter terminal, and trains come here from the suburbs. Everybody see this? Now we use a color-coded system, red, blue, and white, or green. Green is the Hudson line. Goes along the Hudson River, this green line. It's a very scenic train ride. Ends at Poughkeepsie, very close to the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Mansion, very close to the Vanderbilt Mansion.
Oh,
but
nice.
it's very scenic.
There.
You can get views of Sing Sing Prison, U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and you'll even see, like, for example, the Catskills. You'll see, lots of nice mansions as you're taking the train. Beautiful scenery. That's called the Hudson Line. Over here, this red line is the New Haven line. Trains go up to Connecticut. I live at the very top, almost at the very top, at the very end of the blue line, which hugs the New York-Connecticut border. That's known as the Harlem line. And the biggest problem I have in my backyard right now are 400-pound black bears. Products, especially pizza and bagels. Why?
New York water.
Absolutely correct. What was that? New York City water does not come from New York. We have several major lines. The furthest water line comes from the Catskill Mountains. And I'm not a biochemist, but what they tell me is that the microorganisms in the water react very well with dough. And so we're very famous, if you look along the wall there, for all those bagels and pizza, right? One of the reasons is our New York City water.
Those bagels look good. I'm looking forward to eating some bagels and pizza and donuts and everything that's New York City.
I guarantee that's not a single way. Now, in a couple of minutes, we're going to have a train come over here, and we're going to take it 4 stops to Wall Street.
One trade north of $500,000.
Why is there a statue of George Washington? And why is he in the middle of a staircase? You don't often see statues in the middle of staircases. Why is there a statue of George Washington? And why is he in the middle of a staircase?
First
Number
president.
2, you can all see the church, right? Can everybody see the church? Okay, we talked about the church. Number 3, this building here. It's 4 stories tall, and we refer to it as the most important building in Wall Street history. What is it about this building that makes it so famous? And it's not because they filmed Batman: The Dark Knight Rises here. Now, the bull is a 7,000-pound cast bronze statue constructed by a Sicilian artist named Arturo Damadica. It took him 2 years, from 1987 to 1989, and he spent $360,000 of his own money to build it. And what his goal was, he wanted to inspire Wall Street after the stock market crash of October 19th, 1987 that I previously mentioned. He wanted to give kind of a pick 'em up, so to say, a cheerleader to Wall Street after that terrible stock market crash. So he dropped it off in front of the stock exchange in December 1989. He went to jail. The bull went to jail, not for insider trading, but there was no permit when Mr. Damadica dropped off the statue on Broad Street when there was plenty of traffic. The New York Stock Exchange didn't appreciate it, so they notified the authorities. They took him to jail, but the Parks Department, New York City Department of Parks, they control this area known as Bowling Green.
12 seconds later.
The fearless girl is a 10-year-old girl with her hands on her hips, and she's become just as popular, if not more popular, than the bull.
3 hours later.
Hot dog carts throughout the city. If you notice, it's got a permit. See where it says hot pretzel? Now, every one of those permits has a price tag. And just like, what's the rule of real estate investing worldwide?
Location, location, location.
Absolutely correct. The two of you fighting for that honor of the fist bump. Location, location, location. So the best locations have the highest cost per year. What is the biggest price? What's the most expensive food cart permit?
100,000?
100 grand. Any other guesses? $300,000 to sell hot dogs in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because there's no other options for food. They have what is called a captive audience. 5 million people and no place for food. No restaurants for half a mile to a mile. So that's why they charge so much. They have a captive audience.
Those are some sweet pups. They're doing a good job. Look at it, buddy. Oh, they're so sweet.
More people take this ferry every day than any other ferry in the world. Right? It's about 60,000 on the weekends. Saturday, Sunday, 75,000 Monday through Friday. Right? Now, we haven't seen a Coast Guard cutter, but often we see Coast Guard cutters come up with us fully automatic machine guns. Why? Why would they be escorting? Well, you got a 5.2-mile ride across New York Harbor. Number one, 9 months of the year, this boat sinks. The water is too cold. Hypothermia will set in very quickly. 9 months of the year. Now, not now, because the water's warm. But it's too cold. So what they're worried about is a terrorist attack. You can have a boat loaded with explosives that would ram this ferry. You see?
Yeah, you know it.
So that's why they'll never announce it, but you'll see them all the time. Suddenly, some machine gun in the front end. Okay, everybody. Well, let me welcome you to the National 9/11 Memorial. In a few minutes, I'm going to make a short presentation. In a few minutes, I will allow you to disperse, and you're going to go up to the memorial fountains by yourself. But let me give you a little bit of background. Now, the first question I always get, and Jorge was the first one to ask me this, is, where did the towers stand? The question is, where were the towers, the Twin Towers, in relation to where we are now? And the answer is very simple. This reflecting pool behind me, this is in the exact footprint of the South Tower. Now, when we make our way over to the observation deck, where you're headed next, to One World Trade Center, where you do that on your own, we will pass by the North reflecting pool. which is in the exact footprint of the North Tower, right? So let me briefly mention 3 things, and then we'll let you go up here by yourself. We're going to talk about the events of the day, the lessons that were learned, and then the memorial itself, and then I'll let you go. I won't spend too much time here. Number 1, first of all, let's give you the timeline. 8:46 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked from Boston, struck the North Tower. Same thing happened 16 minutes later. United Airlines Flight 175, also hijacked from Boston, struck the South Tower, right where this pool is. Now, even though the South Tower was the second building struck, it was the first one to collapse. My understanding, the reason it collapsed, even though it was struck 16 minutes later, in the South Tower, the plane struck lower in the building, as opposed to the North Tower, where it struck in the 80s and early 90s. Here, it struck, I believe, in the high 70s. When they collapsed, they created man-made earthquakes measuring 2.3 on the Richter scale. Quakes were felt in 5 different American states. It was not until May 30th, 2002, that the final piece of steel was removed from ground zero. 2,983 people perished nationwide in the attacks, almost 3,000, including right here, more than 2,700, including 343 members of the New York City Fire Department, 37 members of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Police Department, 23 members of the New York City Police Department, 3 court security officers, 1 Secret Service agent, 1 FBI agent. In addition to that, a private company in the North Tower, a financial services firm known as Cantor Fitzgerald, lost an astonishing 90% of its workforce, 653 people. 1 company. Now, the debate began, nobody argued. There was no debate. We had to clean up ground zero, right? The whole area was blanketed in a plume of toxic dust containing asbestos, containing mercury. When hundreds of thousands of fluorescent light bulbs crack at one time, puts mercury into the atmosphere. So toxicity all around this area. There are 33,000 people that have been diagnosed with 9/11 related illnesses. Not all cancer, but often cancer, right? Now, once everything was cleaned up, the question became, what do we do with this area? And in a nutshell, now this is a little bit simplistic, but I cannot give you, 10 years of history in a 15-minute, 10-minute presentation. In a nutshell, 2 groups formed. First group, victims' family members. Now, they felt the entire acreage of the World Trade Center, 16 acres, should be a walking plaza, a museum, and a memorial. To them, it was sacred ground because their loved ones died here. And they felt it was disrespectful to rebuild commercially. Everybody follow? Now, I think that's very understandable logic. But another group formed, taking a sort of opposite viewpoint. They certainly understood the need for a national memorial. But they said, if we don't rebuild, Al-Qaeda wins. At some level, Al-Qaeda wins if we do not rebuild commercially. And they suggested putting the memorial someplace else, such as, for example, Washington, D.C., which is a city of large-scale monuments and very close as well because the Pentagon was attacked just across the Potomac River. So the second group felt we should redevelop 100% commercially and put the memorial someplace else. Now, I would argue these are 2 reasonable points of view, just different points of view. Ultimately, they came together to reach a compromise. 9 acres in front of you, sacred ground. Just the reflecting pools, the museum, which is the slanted building here through the trees. You see this slanted steel building?
Yeah.
The museum goes 7 stories underground. The museum is beneath you, but that's the entrance pavilion, right? But in a giant letter L is the redevelopment, starting at the One World Trade Center tallest building in North and South America, what we call the Western Hemisphere, 1,776 feet. Ending at the building right over here, the 4 World Trade Center, where Italy is located. The corner of the L, under construction now, buildings number 2 and 3, under construction. And that will be the giant letter L on the perimeter, right? Giant letter L on the perimeter. And back here is a park and they're rebuilding a church. Just 2 more quick things. 1, what were the lessons that were learned from the events of 9/11 in terms of the new construction? And there were 5 major lessons learned. Number 1, the protection of the inner core. Now when I say inner core, I mean the interior of every building where the stairwells and the elevator shafts are located. Right? There were 99 elevators between the 2 towers. Right? On 9/11, they were not protected structurally. They had only sheet metal and sheet rock surrounding them, just a cosmetic wall. So when the plane struck, in a nutshell, it's like a knife through butter. Those little sheet metal and sheet rock cosmetic walls didn't provide any structural protection. So the people above the point of impact were in a terrible position. They simply had no place to go, even if they could have survived a raging fire beneath them. So the first lesson learned in all of these new buildings, the protection of the inner core. 1 meter thick reinforced concrete around all of the elevators and the stairwells. So if this ever happened again, people above a point of impact would have a structurally protected escape route. Lesson learned number 2, separate stairwells for emergency responders and for civilians. On 9/11, you had this terrible bottlenecking with the firefighters coming up and the civilians coming down. That will not happen again. Remember how we bottlenecked at the Staten Island Ferry? Right? Now, emergency responders and civilians have their own separate stairwells. So they'll be going in one direction, typically only. Lesson learned number 3, pressurization of the stairwells, like cabin pressure in an airplane. Because fire professionals will tell you that smoke inhalation is the greatest threat to the civilian population during a fire. By pressurizing the stairwell, it makes it difficult for the smoke to get inside the stairwell, safer for the civilian. Lesson learned number 4, strength of these buildings is extraordinary. I am not a structural engineer, but the concrete in these buildings, 14,000 pounds per square inch of protection, compared to 3,000 pounds per square inch of protection for standard concrete. In other words, these buildings are about 4 times stronger than the Hoover Dam out near Las Vegas. Incredibly strong, durable building. And the 5th major lesson learned is the ventilation systems. Ventilation systems in these buildings are the most sophisticated ever designed. And then just one more minute on the competition for these pools. This is the largest architectural competition in world history, the 9/11 Memorial. 5,201 architects from 63 countries participated. The winner was an Israeli-born American named Michael Arad, A-R-A-D. And the title of his work is The Reflection of Absence. But Mr. Arad had no choice. He and the other 5,200 entrants had to place their memorials in the exact footprints of the North and here the South Tower. But Mr. Arad chose a waterfall design. Now, Chris and Sharon are heading up to Niagara Falls fairly soon, are you not? This is not like a waterfall you would see at Niagara Falls. Even from here you could tell. The water is pushed through grooves similar to the space between my fingers, creating thousands of individual waterfalls. Not one continuous body of water going over the cliff like you'd see at Niagara Falls. What do those thousands of individual waterfalls represent? Thousands of victims, continuous tears for the loss and the sorrow of that tragic day. Number 2 is the sound created by the falling water. With most people, falling water creates a feeling of tranquility and peacefulness. It brings them inward emotionally. It gets them to think about the events of that day. I think that's a very, very integral part of the memorial. And then finally, of course, the names of all of the victims engraved in bronze on the wall surrounding the pool.